Good evening, everybody. Hi. Good evening. Welcome. Welcome to the local hotel. I've missed being here. This is the first Politics of a Pub for the year. We haven't seen it since 2025. For those of you who are returning, welcome back. And for those of you who have come for the first time, welcome.
Yay.
Yes. My name is Christian Murray, together with Robert Delves. Where's Rob? Can you wave his hand?
Hey.
We're the Fremantle Network. We organise these events every month to bring people together to discuss matters that are important to them over a pint and over a meal to make friends. So if throughout the night you think of a topic that you'd like us to cover in the future, this is what I look like. That's what Rob looks like. Please approach us to suggest a topic that would be very valuable. Now, in a moment, I'm going to introduce the MC. Before I do, I just want to acknowledge the original custodians of this land, the Wajak Noongar people, and pay my earnest respects. Coming from the United Kingdom, it's not lost on me how blessed I am to be here. The United Kingdom is a dreadful place. Australia is much better. Hi, Sarah. I also want to acknowledge the local hotel for having us back. They're extremely accommodating. All of the staff here are some of the best staff that I've worked with in organising events. So if you see that they're looking around and you can help them out in any way, please do offer your help. Okay, now I'm not going to introduce the topic. I'm going to get our MC to introduce the topic. Just before I do, is anybody here afraid of being on video camera? Not afraid, but would anybody here prefer not to be on video camera? Wonderful. I'm going to be just recorded throughout the night to put on my YouTube channel. I hope that's okay. Okay, now our MC is going to introduce the topic. Our MC is the Honourable Brad Pettitt. Round of applause, please. Brad was elected to the Legislative Council of Western Australia Parliament in 2021 and re-elected in 2025. Until taking up this role in the upper house of the state parliament, Brad, as you know, was the mayor of the great city of Fremantle. Prior to this, Brad was the Dean of the School of Sustainability at Murdoch University. If you ever figure out how young he was when he was Dean, it will just intimidate the hell out of you. It's extremely impressive. When not working, he likes riding his bike, drinking coffee, and playing with his 8-year-old daughter. Isn't that gorgeous? Now, just before you applaud Brad, things in order, I also want to acknowledge our new mayor, Ben Lova. And I made the rookie mistake of not putting on my glasses. Are there any other councillors or notables here? Oh, Andrew. Good evening. Andrew Sullivan. Without further ado, a round of applause for our MC, Brad Pettitt.
Thank you, Christian. And well, first Politics of the Pub for 2026, and lovely to see such a huge crowd. It occurred to me today that actually the Fremantle Network, I think this month, started 20 years ago, which is pretty extraordinary. And and it's literally just been an idea of bringing people together to talk about issues for 20 years, which has been pretty amazing. But I do want to pay a special thanks to both Rob and Christian, who have been running with it at least since 2018, when interestingly, the first Politics in the Pub was on housing and homelessness in 2018. So here we are, 8 years later, thank you. I was just doing the maths in my head. And how are you feeling about housing and homelessness now?
Not good.
I mean, because it's extraordinary to think, over those 8 years, when obviously it was an issue back then, we've seen rents probably estimated gone up by about 70% at least during that time. We've seen house prices more than double. We've seen homelessness grow at an unprecedented rate, and especially rough sleeping and people experiencing homelessness directly on that. Housing is in a crisis, but this is not a depressing get-together, because we are going to talk about how we got here and how we can fix it. And we've got some amazing people who are going to do that. So I'm really pleased to be able to come and do that. And I thought if I printed something in 16 font, I could read it. But my eyes are that old, I can't. So excuse me for 1 second. So we've got 4 speakers. Now, Now, our first speaker is going to be Sergio. Now, this is actually a brand new book. Is it actually out yet? Just out. Called Requiem for the Australian Dream, which I just have finished reading today. It's fantastic. And so Sergio gets a special extra time. He's going to get 10 minutes. And all the other speakers are going to be really succinct and get 4 before we have a break, and then we open up to you. Now, timekeeping is always difficult, so I've decided to delegate this to somebody who nobody can refuse, and our relatively new mayor is going to keep time. That means nobody can say no to the mayor of Fremantle if they call time, and you have to give up the microphone. So thank you, Ben. 1 ding means you have 1 minute left. 2 dings mean that you finish your sentence and hand the microphone back to me. All right, that's the plan. Thanks, Ben, for doing that. So yeah, everyone knows the drill. So everyone will speak up front, have a 15-minute break, and get another drink. I always like, when we started the Fremantle Network back in 2006, it always started with the idea that you should speak to somebody who you've never met before. Because the idea is we're an amazing community. We all know lots of people in this room, but we don't know everybody. So go and speak to somebody in the break you haven't spoken to before. And it's amazing. You'll find out things that you never knew before. And then we'll keep back for lots of Q&A after the break. But to kick things off, Sergio Famiano, who has written this amazing book, along with following on from his previous book, The New Australian Dream, is a housing expert, but someone who is just not an academic about these things, actually has been delivering housing. In fact, if you look at projects just through our south, like Coburn Coast, and others, he's actually was very much, in fact, when I was mayor on the City of Fremantle, you were on that project, and so along with Andrew, that's right. So done great projects from that to the Northbridge Link, to the Australian Fine China development in Subiaco. And importantly, Sergio has done some great work around actually bringing local governments together and industry to deliver, to try and make the case for light rail and how that could also change our city. An amazing leader. We really, it's fantastic you're willing to come down, talk about your book and share your expertise with us. So please, to do the whole history that I read in several days in 10 minutes. Good luck. Thanks. Please welcome Sergio.
Thanks, Greg. Just before I start, I have some books over there. If you want to take a copy, it's an honour system, just write your email address. If you're a student, take a copy for free. Look, I just wanted to talk about a couple of things. My job, I guess, tonight is to really talk about the Australian dream and how we lost it, and I've got 10 minutes to do it. So it's going to be a very abridged version. So really, when you look at the Australian dream of home ownership, the main protagonist was Robert Menzies. Ben Chifley as well, but Robert Menzies was the main protagonist. He formulated the Liberal Party in 1944. He spent a lot of time in Britain during the war years, and he had a vision to create an Australia that was self-sufficient, an Australia that everyone would have a home, and an Australia where if you worked hard, you got a good job, a well-paid job, and a very stable future. And part of that was driven by communism and the rise of the Cold War after the Second World War. It was a bulwark to it. So Menzies thought, if we do this for the people will be happy and they won't stray to communism. And it was very effective because he won 7 elections and he's one of our only prime ministers that have actually retired from office. So how did he build the Australian dream? Well, going back to 1949, after the state and federal government struck a housing accord under Ben Chifley, housing was very much a government proposition, and I think that's very important because it isn't today. Government has very little role in housing. But back then it did, and a lot of the land around cities in Australia were owned by government. So government played a direct role. Government provided a lot of incentives. I mean, it's interesting that it's a Liberal government applying Keynesian economics, but government played a significant role. There were grants given to homeowners, there were generous interest rates given to returning war veterans. There were a whole lot of, I guess, incentives given to people to own a home.
The banking system was boring and it was geared for delivering home ownership. It wasn't for speculation. We'll come back to that in a minute. And interestingly enough, Robert Menzies and his government created a diversified economy. So we had a lot of manufacturing that grew under the government stewardship through protectionism, and importantly, this created very well-paid middle-class jobs for Australians. So the average worker who wasn't necessarily educated could work in a factory, have a stable job. It was protected by government through protectionism, through tariffs and the like, and they got paid well. And at the time, the labour pool was quite tight because there was a baby boom after the Second World War, so pretty much only men worked, so that meant high wages. So it was a very golden period, and if you look at the mining industry today, for example, a lot of that came from the incentives that were given by the Menzies government. The Menzies government gave a lot of grants, they gave a lot of subsidies to mining companies to open up the mining in Australia. They did that across the board. And it was a one focus on creating an Australia that was egalitarian and a fair go society. And that's why I rate Menzies as our best Prime Minister ever. Because if you want to think about an egalitarian society, it was Menzies and his coalition that created it. But unfortunately, from the 1970s onwards, we started to see some changes, and we know about neoliberalism. So the rise of Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek and their economic theories about the free market. They were advocates, as you know, for free trade. They were advocates for breaking down tariff barriers. They were advocates for getting government out of the way. Okay, and the early starters, the early precursors of that was Chile. If you looked at what happened to Pinochet's Chile, it's still recovering today from the neoliberalism that was introduced by Milton Friedman in that country. So what we started to see in the mid-1970s was the creeping in of neoliberal economic theory, and my book talks about it in detail. But it really took hold, ironically, during the 1980s. So when the Bob Hawke government came into power and Keating as the treasurer, they bought into the neoliberal theory. So they started deregulating lots of things. They deregulated the banking industry, for example, which we'll talk about in a minute. But they also started entering Australia into free trade agreements. They started ripping down tariffs. So basically all the things that protect the diversity in the Australian economy were being ripped apart by the Labor government, which is ironic because they're supposed to be people, they're supposed to be a government for the people. And it continued. It wasn't just a Labor thing, it was a Liberal Party as well, under John Howard. So if you think of what happened during the 80s, the prices and incomes accords, for example, suppressed wage growth for a lot of Australians. But at least the Labor government gave Medicare and they gave superannuation as compensators. But wages were suppressed. So we start to see the long trajectory of flatlining of wages in Australia. And that's important because the housing crisis isn't just about house prices going through the roof, it's about flatlining of wages as well. Under Menzies, we had high wages. From the 1980s onwards, we started to see flatlining. So part of it was the labour law changes that were introduced by the Labor government, the deregulation of the banking industry, and we also saw the deprotectionism of Australian industry, which decimated industry in Australia. And it took all these well-paid middle-class jobs to Japan, Taiwan and other countries, never to come back. John Howard comes into power. If you think of Labor suppression under the union suppression under Howard and Keating, Howard wanted to get rid of it all. So basically he introduced labour laws which basically took the unions out. He was our Thatcher, basically, in Australia. And if anyone here has worked in employment in your early years of your life, under Howard was a casualisation of the workplace, so people on casual wages, not protected through any means, and contracts basically were introduced under John Howard, all under the guise of flexible labour force. But as we know, that means your labour rights are taken away. So we started to see a lot of that in the 2000s, and I remember talking to my dad about this, saying this is going to hit us 20 years from now, it's going to hurt us. Because at the time he introduced that, Australia was doing well as an economy, And you don't tend to notice these changes when you're doing well in an economy. There were other changes that happened when we talk about shift between home ownership and an economy that is driven by home ownership to an economy that's driven by speculation. Now, during the 80s, we had a deregulation of the banking industry, which I mentioned, which introduced new banks into Australia, which increased liquidity. It increased new housing mortgage products, which allowed you to have flexible loans. It introduced reduced deposit rates. All this was good for home ownership, but it was also good for investment as well. Because in the early years, you used to have 20% deposit to get a home, right? And that was hard to save. That all came down from the 80s onwards. We also see under the Howard government is the introduction of capital gains tax reform, which provides a lot of extra money for people that speculate. We also see a series of tax cuts which are basically geared towards the more wealthy in society. So when you start to add deregulation of the banking industry, negative gearing, capital gains tax, favourability to investors, and then tax cuts for the wealthy, all of a sudden you're incentivising speculation in your economy. And Thatcher did the exact same thing in Britain. So we moved from an economy that was about home ownership to an economy that's about speculation. And it really came home to roost in the 2000s, because a couple of things happened in the 2000s. Firstly, we had war on terror, and we had the global financial crisis. What did that do? That introduced significant reduction in interest rates. That meant cheap credit. So when you combine all the things I just said with cheap credit, with population growth, because population growth in the 2000s doubled compared to the previous 2 decades. When you had the China boom as well, the Australian economy, all of a sudden you see a massive influx of investment in property. And just to give you a statistic, from 2000 to 2023, there were 3.5 million properties built in Australia during that period. 1.43 million of those properties were investment properties. Okay, 40.8%. Okay, that's how much property was incentivised during that period because of the decisions that were made 20 years earlier, leading up to the 2000s. Now, if that didn't halt everything, we had COVID. And the thing that COVID did was that COVID ballooned the cost of construction. So now we've got this rising investment stream, we've got issues with inflation and issues with population growth, and now we have the cost of construction that's that high, it's doubled. So it's no wonder we have a housing crisis at the moment. Now, I haven't talked about social housing, but maybe a question later.
Thank you. Thank you, Sergio. It's an impressive 10-minute summary of how we got here. I think you covered 300 pages in 10 minutes, which is pretty impressive. But so because tonight is about the past, present, and future. So as we, I think Sergio's mapped out, in many ways, how we got here. Our next 2 speakers are going to talk a bit around where we are currently and what the situation looks like. And Tina Ugle is our next speaker. And Tina is a proud Noongar Yoga from the Balladong and Neward regions with strong Whadjuk connections and over 30 years experience in the Aboriginal housing sector. She's the Managing Director of the Noongar Mia Mia and a Director of the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Housing Association, which is the national peak body for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander housing. Tina is a strong advocate for Aboriginal self-determination and works to advance culturally grounded solutions to housing and homelessness for Aboriginal communities. Thank you, Tina. Please give her a round of applause.
Thank you. I do have some notes, so don't mind me. Probably this is the first time I've ever been to one of these. So yeah, my name is Tina Ugle and I'm a Noongar Yoga with Balladong and Whadjuk connections, and I'd also like to acknowledge my team, my colleague here, Clint, who works for Noongar Mia Mia. So first of all, has anyone heard of Noongar Mia Mia?
Yeah.
That's not a lot. We've been around for 26 years. and we provide housing for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Noongar country. Noongar country being also, we have properties in Esperance, and we head lease these properties off the government, and we also own properties, and the titles were handed over to us back in 25 years ago, from the demise of ATSIC, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, which was the voice of the Aboriginal people in Australia. And basically, 63 properties were managed, and we now currently have, I've been with the company for 9 years, and we currently have 101 properties. Is that right, Clint? So we worked really hard, but the thing is, a lot of these properties are under extreme lease sort of so we are community housing. We charge 25% of our tenants' rent. We have very complex tenants that have trauma, living in poverty and facing racism, and every day we get complaints, and so we had to be really innovative because we're not funded by the government. We're a not-for-profit charitable organisation, and our income is our rent. However, we do have a homelessness program called Noongar Mia Mia, which is funded by the Department of Communities, and we service our mob on the street. As you probably know, a lot of Aboriginal people are homeless. I'm sure they're more noticeable, right? And we have housed 63 Aboriginal people in Perth through hustling, really, with organisations and, you do this and we'll do that. What we had to do, we had to be really innovative, and some of the solutions is that we developed our own tenancy support program. We get a lot of donations. We got a $3 million donation, which we're very grateful, from Sonia Rogers' estate, and she was well known here in Fremantle, and worked with the homeless. And with that, we developed our resources. We developed a tenant support team based on the Housing First principles, but we changed it to our Noongar Housing First principles. So we deliver that training, so that's an income for us. It's cultural awareness in the housing industry for service providers. How you approach Aboriginal people, the language. I'm not expecting white people to say, hey, here you mob, but there's ways that you can do it that will instantly connect, and that's what we deliver. We offer, and with that tenant support comes brokerage. So internally we've done a lot of work. However, we're still kind of, with the government, we're still trying to have a voice within the department. We still believe that stock needs to be transferred, not only transferred for us to head lease, but it needs to be, the deeds need to come to us so that we can grow as an organisation, because we can't. We're struggling, and the truth is that I have to get rid of staff, which is something we're going to go back to square one. So a lot of what I do and Clint does is try and get properties and also make the government accountable. They all signed the national agreement, and also the social and housing national agreement, and that's where I come in and make them, you need to, Kerry, you need to do that. And also to develop an Aboriginal housing peak here in WA. WA and Queensland and Tasmania are the only states that don't have a Aboriginal housing peak, and that's our goal. We have Shelter WA, but it doesn't represent Aboriginal people. So thank you very much, and any questions, please ask Johanna.
Thank you, Tina. Really good to hear about the amazing work you're doing, so and thank you so much for doing it. Our next speaker is my colleague, which is really nice, Tim Clifford, who we share we're one of 4 Greens members in the upper house of the Parliament, but Tim brings something really important and special to the Parliament, because he is our housing and homelessness spokesperson. And Tim grew up in social housing in regional Western Australia, and so brings that first-hand lived experience to the Parliament, probably like nobody else, and he certainly understands how important having a strong public and social housing sector is, and having a strong safety net. So Tim, great to have you join us, and please make him welcome.
Thanks, Bradley. Thanks, Tina and Vince and Sergio for all the work that you're doing to raise awareness and the work you're doing within the community. It's fantastic. But it's amazing listening to Sergio, because I think some of the points he touched on was a bit of a part of my story. Like, and Brad mentioned that I was in public housing in the 90s in Albany, but when I moved to Perth, I was working construction, and I remember working down in Settlers Hills as a labourer, working on those subdivisions and thinking, wow, geez, a block is very expensive down here. It's $45,000. And then obviously with work choices with John Howard, like the company that I was working for, we were constantly in a running battle with them, negotiating wages, and I think they had our wages down to like $11 an hour. So there was no, even at that time, it was very hard because of the industrial changes and the attack on the labour unions. It was quite significant in formulating my views on fairness. And this is what led me sort of into politics, but that'll be another conversation we can do another night. But yeah, so we're in a really dire situation, and as Brad mentioned, that we're going to talk about the now. And some of the work that Brad did in the Parliament, like we've had courage with since last year. But I can tell you that the work that Brad did and the continuation of that is to raise awareness and to tell people's stories. It's been at the heart of what we do. We've done a lot of work in the past, I think 8 or 9 months, to go out to regional WA, speak to housing providers, and speak to people who are being impacted. And the work that we've been doing is split between working with these groups on solutions, as well as like advocating for individuals. And every week we're having to write so many letters, like out of the office, representing individuals who are just in such dire situations, who never thought they'd be in this situation, and there's shame involved. And this is why I think it's important that the people experiencing this are the people that should be leading the reforms that we need in this state to actually speak truth to power when it comes to the government. Because in the current state of affairs, we have a government who has chosen the winners, right? They don't talk about, like, they're all about the carrot. They offer incentives, as we've seen with the recent downsizing initiative with stamp duty reduction concessions, but they never want to offer the stick, which is like to make sure that restricting things such as things as short stays, or telling investors what to do with their properties by introducing such things as rent caps, or abolishing no cause evictions, which is something that it would make such a difference in people's lives. So we really do need a revolution of ideas when it comes to this, but it's going to come out of working across the lines and actually making sure that people like John Kerry, because they pretty much support, they've chosen the narrative they're going to choose, which is like, we're going to build ourselves out of this problem, which is just not going to happen. So looking forward in the next, because we do have 3 years left in the term, we're looking at continuing the work of Brad, reintroducing an amendment bill to abolish no cause evictions. We're looking at advocating for rent caps, because as Brad mentioned, that rents have gone up 70% in the last 5 years, which has just been devastating to our community and tearing people apart. But also looking at such mechanisms as, like, we've seen Victoria introduce increasing actually land taxes that will hit vacant properties, as well as it hits the investors in a way that they will be required to pay taxes and relinquish some of those properties that, like, if they're hoarding, they should be giving up those properties. And I'd actually like to see a government that is willing to turn around. We've done a series of videos on vacant properties that the state government owns, but also when it comes to private properties, and just up in Maylands, not far from where I live, there's a property across the road from Coles, which I'd like to see the government be to acquire the land. We're in a housing crisis, and actually reflect the housing crisis that it is, and go, we're going to correct this by actually shaking things up and doing something about it. And they're the things that we're going to be advocating for. And I think that is going to be one of the main key things that going forward is to not only do this in a way it's going to be pretty hard-edged, I think the campaign needs to be, But also bring back this, I was chatting to it earlier today, which is a revolution of ideas around kindness and empathy, and bringing back the lived experience into the narrative of this. Because you would have noticed that the government is really good at just ignoring the people that it's impacting, and they're the people who vote for them as well. So I'm really looking forward to building broad coalitions from across the whole political divide to make sure we have solutions to this problem, because we need them. But yeah, thank you. Thanks, Kim. It was one of the best things about having colleagues in the Parliament was that instead of having all the portfolios, I only have a quarter of them. But seeing Tim take on housing and doing such great work in that space has been great. So thanks a lot, mate. Much appreciated. Okay, one last speaker before we have a break, and this is now pivoting to thinking about what are some of the solutions as we go forward. And I would also say Sergio's book is full of solutions as well, so we're going to have to ask you some questions about those after the break. But our final speaker is someone who's actually bringing something really important to this debate and potentially a real game changer. So Tobias Busch, many of you will know, is an architect with Space Agency who do amazing buildings from houses to restaurants and bars throughout Freo. You'd recognise their work. And along with other Freo locals, Tobias is actually establishing what's called a community land trust, a community-led housing project that's reimagining how we approach affordable housing here in Freo. It's a really exciting idea, and please make Tobias welcome as he talks to us.
Thank you, Brad, and thanks to everyone who's spoken so far. I think there's a lot of overlap in what I'm going to say and what you've already said. I'm going to try and put that a little bit into the context of a community land trust.
Hold the microphone closer, please.
I can try. So I'm here to talk about community land trust, or CLT in short, but I think I'm going to start with a question, and that is, what if the most radical thing in housing that we can do is not what we build or how we build it, but who gets to create our cities? Because if you look at how housing is done at the moment, it's done by a very small group of actors, mostly developers, big community housing providers, really bureaucratic organizations. Most of us are just consumers. And we may be consulted, we may get to stick a post-it note on a map occasionally, but we're not really authors. We don't really get a say in what happens. Same actors, same outcomes, over and over again, and that's really why we are where we are in housing crisis. I think the previous speakers have set the scene about what the housing crisis looks like and how desperate it is. So I'm just going to jump ahead and talk about what a CLT is. Because a CLT has the potential to really flip the script. I'm just going to outline what they are for anyone who doesn't know. Tina probably understands it very well because I think it's very closely aligned to what your organization tries to do. And again, CLTs are not-for-profit organizations. They're run by people who want to improve their local community. And essentially what they do is they take land off the market forever and they establish an ownership structure that through long-term leaseholds or straight-out ownership that is guarded by community stewardship for generations. Residents in a CLT lease or co-own homes through shared ownership initiatives, and the CLT sets a limit of resale prices, and that's usually tied to a locally specific parameter. Most often it's wages, so it directly reflects the income of people who live in areas so they can actually continue to live and afford to live in that area. And I think that's probably where the most radical aspect of CLTs lie, because the ownership ideas of a CLT, of housing under a CLT, are very different from what we know now. It's not speculative, it is entirely based on home ownership and security of tenure. Another important aspect of CLTs is the governance structure. They're usually governed by a tripartite board structure, which has got equal representation of people who live in the CLT, community members who live around the CLT and support what the CLT wants to do, and nominated directors who bring a level of expertise that the CLT requires to operate, and that could be legal, financial, planning, whatever really is required at the time to grow or keep the CLT running. But the board also ensures that any one group of interests can take over and that the land can go back into the market, or the housing kind of goes off the rails and becomes something it wasn't intended to be. CLTs also have the capacity to develop a whole range of homes, ranging from micro homes all the way up to apartments and everything in between. So I think they ideally placed, and I think we've seen this internationally, to deliver what we call the missing middle infill housing, often with a lot less friction than we see, because it kind of undermines the idea of NIMBYism by involving the community from the outset when you're embarking on establishing or developing a piece of land in an established suburb like Fremantle. But what it also does, it creates housing for missing moderates, and I think again that's something that's really relevant to Fremantle. Missing moderates, I use that term to describe people who can get on the housing ladder because they have a deposit. They can afford to buy homes, but not necessarily in places like Fremantle. And I think there's a lot of people who feel like that they work, they live in Fremantle, but they can't afford to live anywhere near Fremantle, even though they're not considered at risk of homeless or poor. Shit, I'm halfway through. Anyway, I'll skip ahead. I mean, CLTs, as we know them, are not new. I think they've been around for millenniums. I think they find roots in joint belonging and care for country that we've seen in Aboriginal peoples all over the world, Mexico, Africa, China, and right here in Australia. The modern CLT movement comes from the 1960s American civil rights movement, where it focused on economic justice, racial equality, and community control of housing and agricultural life. And there's lots of examples where they've been successful. Just to give one, in Burlington, Vermont, which is one of the oldest contemporary CLTs, there's currently 2,200 households which have been affordable for over 40 years. And Brussels, for example, provides CLT housing at 25% below market rate. Why this matters here in Australia, in particular at this point of time, I think housing has become a very gated practice. It's gated by funding, it's gated by planning regulations, by construction codes. They're all designed to take you out of the process of making your own homes, right? So again, it reinforces the idea that there's a very small group of actors, and that's only a very recent development. And I think another example I want to touch on is that the Housing Australia Fund, Australia, which was announced a couple of months ago, $10 billion for affordable housing. It sounds great, but it was really only accessible to community housing providers, grassroots organizations, and it was oversubscribed in a matter of days. Grassroots housing providers or community land trusts have no access to it because we just haven't got the resources. And finally, I'm just going to finish with one because I really like this concept. I'd like to talk about something called gentle anarchy when it comes to community land trust. And I think we all know what it is, we just don't call it that. It's really this spontaneous self-organization that already exists in everyday life. And community land trusts are embodiment of that.
Thank you, Clive. All right, that's some inspiring stuff, which reminds us that business as usual, what we think is normal, there are actually plenty of other better alternatives. So we're going to take a 10 to 15 minute break now. 15 minute break now. And then, but while you're there, we want you to speak to somebody you've never spoken to before, and we want you to come up with a question or comment that you really want to ask this amazing panel of experts that you've heard from tonight. So, what is the time, Christian? What is the time in 15 minutes' time? Sorry.
Oh, it'll be 5 to 8.
So we'll see you back here at 5 to 8 with your questions ready to go. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm just curious, it seems like we, in addition to economic and legislative change, need some sort of broader cultural change in Australia to drive these factors as well. I'm curious, do any of you have ideas for how to sort of spark that cultural change towards a more kind and communal housing vision for the future?
I think it's already happening. And you can see that in the polls. Like, people are switching to One Nation on the Liberal side, where there's an ideological crisis with the Liberal Party. Like, they're blaming immigration for the housing crisis, and it's easy to understand because they're going, you rock up to a home open and there's 50 people there, right? But I think people are waking up to the fact that it's unfair and it should be corrected. And I've said outside of the chamber to Labor members, I said, if you don't try and address this and get on the front foot, it'll address you. Because like, democracies change very quickly when inflation is going up and people can't afford to put a roof over their heads. So I think these ideas are pretty much mainstream, but I think the political parties that are sitting in controlling the halls of power right now don't actually understand that they are. So that's a problem for them.
Can I just add something? So, look, I've been listening a lot tonight about political stuff, but I'm a real, I'm a very operational person on the ground, and the fact is, Aboriginal people are struggling to even rent in mainstream because of the colour of their skin. It happened in my family, it's probably happening, Paula's, Clint's, and we have to send the fair skin sister, which is me, to go into, you know what I mean? So this is real and it's happening, and this is the struggles that we're having because they can't come into our property, even though I'm the biggest rule breaker there ever was, because they earn a little bit over the threshold of income. So this is why our mob are homeless, and this is what's causing overcrowding. Even though our mob, we feel obligated to look after our family, and we'll take them in. There's only so much you can take, and these are the intergenerational issues that we are facing within our organisation. So I just wanted to put that in.
Sergio.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that I address in my book is that there's a need to rein in a bit of speculation. And a couple of ways of doing that is, firstly, Bill Shorten actually had a good idea, right? Do you remember 2018 or 2009? Yeah. He wanted to keep negative gearing, right? Because negative gearing on its own is not the problem. It's everything else that I talked about in my presentation that comes together. But what he wanted to do is he wanted to stop negative gearing for existing properties. Yeah. So if I'm buying an existing property, you don't get to use negative gearing, and that's a good thing because you're not adding to the property stock. But if I build an investment property, I should be able to get negative gearing. Why? Because you're adding to the investment stock. You're adding properties and adding rentals. Great idea, right? As a medium point, as a practical idea, as a medium point to appease certain people in society. But he got shot for it too early. Maybe now he should propose that. The other thing is reining in capital gains tax, because that's a major incentive for property investment and share investment as well, right? And one of the things I would suggest is taking down the tax-free threshold of 50% down to 40 or 30, and the extra tax that the extra proceeds that the governments get, put that aside for housing, right? Quarantine it and put it to housing. All of us, because I'm a big believer in balanced budgets, I hate debt, right? And I hate the fact that our federal government's got a $1 trillion debt. So I believe in solutions which sort out a problem, but don't add debt for future generations to deal with. That's why I believe in quarantining that money and putting it aside for future housing for people.
Great work. Thank you.
Sorry.
That's a good question. Everyone's answering.
Yes, I just want to go back to the cultural change, because I think that is fundamentally why we've changed, where we started thinking about community land trusts. Because to put it really frankly, I don't think the politicians are going to deliver. I don't think they're going to, maybe excluding the politicians in the room. But I think we are heading into, I would call it another housing crisis, which is going to be a lot less tangible, but it's going to be just as critical when we get there. And that crisis is about housing that is fit for purpose. And that is fit for purpose at a human level, fit for purpose for society that we want to create and live in, but also fit for purpose for climate responsive housing. And I think the community land trust really provides a platform for people to take that into their own hands and start themselves. And just to give just to give an example for Fremantle, and this is why it is so critical to me, is we've seen in Fremantle in the last 6 months applications for more than 400 dwellings of what is called co-living. Co-living is apartments that are 20 to 30 square meters with a little bit of amenity to make up for the loss. But it's not apartments that are suitable for families. They're very suitable for a very small demographic who actually will make use of it. Not even students. This is for working people, supposedly, and it doesn't spark any joy whatsoever, and it's not designed. So I think it's a crisis we're heading into.
Thank you. Okay, Andrew.
Question for Sergio, please. In your quick summary of the history, you didn't mention Gough Whitlam. I believe the sacking of Whitlam is the major cause for our current problem. I'll tell you why. His Department of Urban and Regional Development developed a scheme for 12 new cities to stop the capitals getting bigger and bigger. And I was president of the Institute of Surveyors at that time, so I was dealing with the plans. I was also a member of the Commonwealth Public Service. And the method of creating 12 new cities was to move a government department to that city, the federal department, to that brand new city where the land had been bought at farm prices and would be sold at that same price. And then all those public servants would generate new property. Of course, the people who owned land in Sydney and Melbourne ganged up with all the other people who hated Whitlam to have him sacked. And the Department of Urban and Regional Development was disbanded the next day. Now, if that had have happened, we had 12 new cities. Prepared in that way, we would not have a problem.
That's a good point, and I do touch on that in my book. Gough Whitlam did a lot of good things, but he got caught up in the 1973 oil prices. That's what undid his government, which we're about to go through again, by the way. You're absolutely right. He established that government department. He was the first to do it on a federal level. And it came back, I think, under Hawke and Keating, under Better Cities, was the incarnation of that. So he does leave a legacy. So yeah, I do touch on that in the book. So it is an important point. And I will add that one of the solutions, if you read my mind, is about remanufacturing in Australia and building energy and food security in this country. And I do believe that that should be built, a lot of it, in the regions, to decentralise Perth.
Thank you.
I just want to ask a couple of easy yes or no questions for the panel and the room, if anyone wants to call out. Do you think a housing first approach would be good for society, yes or no?
Yes.
First approach.
Yes. Right. Does everyone here resonate if I say we are in this room ultimately because of compassion?
Yes.
So hypothetically, if it was possible to redesign the home ownership journey to lift up the collective and work towards a housing first society within 10 years, would you like to see that happen?
Yes.
Right? We have your permission.
Thank you. Like a yes, no question. Who's next?
And Krista, we've got someone behind me too. Just
Hi, Sarah. Actually, Rachel Pettitt told me during the last election, that the state government is the single largest landowner in the city of Freo. Yeah, so the idea if we can push some back onto state government and get some housing out of it, great. But my actual question was, maybe Tim and Brad, you want to jump in. You mentioned building coalitions across the political divides. What does that actually look like, and how are you planning on doing that?
Well, first of all, it's the divide within the community that I see. And I think the rise of the clickbait social media in regards to putting people against each other, building coalitions that you don't expect is one thing. But we have a really diverse chamber in the upper house as well. Like, so, you know, speaking to folks, nationals in the regions, the Liberals, like we had a debate a couple of weeks ago, and I put one of the Liberals aside and go, you guys are crazy. Like, pursuing like this whole, you're calling out the Labor Party on lack of supply when you have an absolute opportunity to outflank them. And I think the debate we mentioned it before with the One Nation thing, I think there's a real appetite for people to talk about things like, we've got people that we didn't expect talk about taxing gas industry and I've heard acquiring land off private owners and all that kind of stuff. I think they're the things that we need to amplify as people who have a megaphone in this space, and to really normalise that language, because some of the politicians are still talking about the life as it was back in the 90s, and it just doesn't exist anymore. So I think we need to talk about what we are aiming towards, and we need to be loud about it.
Requiem also told me the best stuff she did on council was when her and a Liberal agreed.
Yes, yeah, same thing, yeah.
It's interesting about the Liberal Party because Sandra Brewer is the shadow, she's the shadow Minister for Housing, and I think she's compromised because she used to be on the Property Council, right? And they're a lobby group for people like Nigel Satterley and so forth, so I'll just leave that with you. If you look at mobilising, yes, at a political level, I gave a presentation last week in Adelaide to students, and I gave them a pretty gloomy outlook, right? Forget what I did in 10 minutes, I did that in an hour, and it was pretty depressing. But I said, there's one thing that you've got in your favour, and that is, for the first time in a very, very long time, people from the ages of 18 to 30, 35 are now the biggest voting bloc in the country, right? And in my book I mentioned, take a leaf out of the book of the baby boomer, right? All the rights that we enjoy today, a lot of them came from baby boomers in the 70s. They got Australians out of the Vietnam War, they gave women's rights, absolutely. And that's why I love the baby boomers. I don't bash them, I actually love them. And they also spearheaded the environmental movement. And I've seen to these young kids, that's your race card. That's the only thing that you've got, is to speak about these issues. Now, if you're able to mobilise about Palestine, which is great, I've got no issue with that. If you're able to mobilise for that, mobilise for housing. Because you're the largest bloc out there now, and if you group together, they have to listen to you.
Okay, now we've got 5 people in line for the next 20 minutes, which is totally doable. If there's time after that, I'm going to give priority to the youngest person in the room. So if there's a young person in the room, you get to jump in and be the last person to ask a question.
Okay, 5 to go. Over to you.
I've got a question on the crisis today, not tomorrow or the day after, but how do you intend to solve it? We've got hundreds of people on the street now, the government's lost the plot. Melra's talking about housing first and permanent solutions, but how do we solve it using temporary solutions and disaster relief type solutions?
Can I start by saying we've done it before? Does anyone remember Tent City and Pioneer Park? When government decides it wants to solve a problem, and this was the case because there was an election coming in, it was in front of Smoky Group's office just behind it. They found homes for all of those people immediately. So I'm forgetting, Andrew, I forget how many there were. There was over 100, I think, from memory. Where literally on one day, everybody who wanted to move into a hotel room or another form of housing got the option. So when governments want to solve a problem, they can. So I just always remind myself of that. As we continue to see growing numbers of people who are street present, remember governments can solve these things. But
and just to add on that, the government then approached our company to deliver Aboriginal housing first, right? So maybe we need to sort of go back into that crisis, but also in saying that, so you're talking about the HEART, which is the Homelessness Assertive Outreach. The majority of our clients are Aboriginal people, literally, and Pauline from St. Pat's can. So what about my people? Do you know what I mean? Where is the support for ACOs to help our mob deliver solutions that come for us, by us, for us? And I get really upset because I'm sick of seeing my people homeless.
I don't know if we answered your question entirely. but I think it's a good one. And you know, I'll be on your show shortly. We can have a chat about it. Okay. Who's next? Hi, Fred.
So we're talking a lot about supply side, but I'd just like to raise questions around the demand side. So the average sort of number of people coming into West Australia before COVID was about 25,000. By 2023, that was 65,000. Like, and then it's so. I mean, not that I'm like pro One Nation or anything like that, but like you see with the nature of employment in West Australia, with the boom and bust cycle of the mining industry, these large projects, AUKUS, Kwinana, Port, things like that, where you see these companies, they sort of tend to just go, oh, we need people. And what about our like skills training? Is it broken? Like, what can anyone talk to? Like our skills training to sort of, I don't know what the answers are, but I know that is there any sorts of points in this space that we can discuss?
All right, well, the elephant in the room I mentioned before was the cost of construction. The cost of construction, that's, a lot of politicians they love to bash planning. Planning's the problem, Planning's about 5% of the problem. The major issue is cost of construction, it's doubled. It's not coming down, right? Immigration is part of the solution, because if you can bring people from Ireland and what have you, that can fill the gap, the skills gap that we have, that will help that. That'll bring more skilled labourers into the housing. I have to say though, and that's not being addressed properly, I have to say though that immigration is a challenge, and I'm not a One Nation person, right? My family's immigrant, but it is putting pressure on. So if you can think of, we've got heaps of people coming into the country, we've got planning laws that are pretty tight, we've got cost of construction that's too high, no one's building, not even investors are building. But where do we house these people? This is the same problem that's in Britain. It's not about targeting people that are immigrants per se, it's about numbers. I don't think we can accommodate it right now, and I think we need to be very targeted about our immigration. We need more tradies into the country, but we need the numbers down. I know that's a sensitive issue, but it's the truth, right? And we need to do that for the next couple of years, because as I mentioned in my presentation, immigration numbers in Australia have gone on a new paradigm shift from the 80s and 90s. So in the 80s and 90s, it was here, from 2000 onwards, it went like that. And it's been on that paradigm ever since. The difference is our planning systems, our building systems are far more complex than what they used to be. We've got all sorts of supply issues as a result of that. People want big homes. We can't build houses because they're too expensive. That's part of the problem. It is.
Yeah, you mentioned demand. I'd like to see, I see a lot of media releases around, we're releasing 300 properties down in Bunbury, for example, last year, and it's like, imagine if the government legislated to quarantine, 20 to 30% of that for public housing. There's 9,500 plus short stay accommodation across the state. Imagine if the government turned and go, there's a cap, 5,000, there's 4,500 back in the rental market with decreased rents. There's a lot of the broad-based land tax. There's a lot of mechanisms that they can pull the levers on to actually increase supply without actually having to build a house. Not to say that they can still put the money into, but also the other thing is that the state government says, oh, we have a housing first model. Finland or also has a housing first model, but the difference is that they should escalate the spend on actually building houses and actually put resources behind it, because we're in the richest state in the world, one of them, and they can do it. So.
Yeah, I just want to let you all know that so when we got this 3 million, because we know there's no housing, right? We bought land. I did ask for it because it's our land off Development WA. So we bought land off them, and we obtained. So there is. I'm just looking at solutions, and then we approached the Sisters of St John of God for a grant to build, and we got it. So we're in the process of building 11 apartments for over 55s in Midland, and we're a little old Noongar Aboriginal organisation that are broke. So you can do it. But we need more money now because the building costs have gone up.
I think that brings me back to the question I asked at the beginning is, why don't we reconsider who creates the city? And I think that applies to housing as well. And one of the points that I didn't get to was that if you only look back, I don't know if it's the same in Australia, but I grew up in Germany, and you only need to go back 1 or 2 generations, and everybody was hands-on involved in building houses, redecorating, changing houses so they're more climate responsive. It was a hands-on task and everybody had the skill, but more importantly, I think also the time. And we've moved into kind of, I think that's a different story altogether. But I think the skills shortage can to some extent be addressed by enabling people to be a little bit more hands-on with their own housing. And maybe just going back on the CLT story as well, for us it started with a cooperative housing development that we tried to get up and running in Whitecomb Valley. And at that point we were looking at, for example, working with a Dutch company who specialized in making buildings that are a shell. Enough to get it approved, enough to get it waterproof, enough to get it going, and then you can get the occupants in to put the final touches on whether they want to pay for someone if they can afford it, or whether they want to do it themselves. It makes a dent in the construction and the development cost. I think there's lots of little techniques that we can apply that would take chips out what you're talking about pretty quickly.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here.
Just very quickly, I just want to add a point on that.
course.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Remember I was saying in my 10-minute presentation, government used to have a lot of land, right? Back in the Menzies era and stuff. Right up until the 90s, government used to have a lot of land, right? And when I say a lot of land, about 20% of the land supply out there was government owned, right? Why is that a good thing? Because government's not driven by profit necessarily. And when acute shortages of land supply occur, government can release land to moderate things and keep prices down. Richard Cord, his government, I'm talking about WA now, in the 1990s sold a lot of that land off. Right now, government, Development WA, Department of Communities or Department of Housing, they only own around 7% now of the land supply out there. It's all privatised. Nigel Sattleys of the world own all the land. Yeah. And as a result of that, who's driven by what? Government's got less of an ability to intervene into the market to increase supply to moderate prices. It's owned by the private sector now. Again, neoliberalism. Government get out, right? And that's because of lobbying. Now, unfortunately, we're in that position. Development WA, Department of Health only own 7%. They're ineffective in providing a solution to land supply. And what really irks me is the other day, Nigel Sattleys was on TV, right? I don't hate this guy, right? He's just a businessman, right? He was on TV and he was eyeing off the Irwin Barracks, right, which is owned by the federal government. And he was talking about, as if it was his land, right? I've been eyeing that off for years. That should go to Development WA to develop for the state.
Okay, so everybody, round of applause please. So I know how this is going to go. Our speakers, they've made a commitment to be here and we want to honour their time because some people have kids at home, they have family at home. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Honestly, I think that's going to be the extent. For each of our speakers, if there's something that comes to mind, you can say it in your closing remarks. Okay, so if you can respond directly to the question, do so, but if it's tangential, closing remarks.
I just have a comment about negative gearing, which is enthusiastically promoted by the conservative side of politics. In this regard, I'm particularly reminded of a comment by Malcolm Turnbull, who said that any attempt to abolish negative gearing would smash the property market. Well, I don't think that that's true. And the reason why I don't think that it's true is that in New Zealand, where I'm from, you can't negative gear in the way that you can here. And the property market in Auckland is just as outrageous as it is in Sydney. So I think that the fundamental premise of that idea that negative gearing is important for the survival of the property market is just not true.
Quick comment from anyone, Kim?
Yeah, I agree. And
Check.
Yeah, and like just during the election last year, I was door knocking in Maylands, and there was a guy who had 4 investment properties, and he wanted to get into a debate about our policy on negative gearing, abolishing negative gearing. And he said, "Well, if I'm not negative gearing my 4 properties, then we won't have rentals." And I said, "Well, how many of those were negative geared new builds, as Sergio was mentioning before?" And he goes, 0. And it just sort of like, the houses don't fly into the sun. They're still here. They're gonna and he just sort of paused, and we ended the conversation. So I mean,
Did you vote green?
No.
What a lot of some of the baby boomers would know this, right? But in 1985, negative gearing was abolished, right? Believe it or not. It was, yeah. Paul Keating was worried about the fact that it was a tax deduction and it was hitting the federal budget. But after 2 years, they capitulated and they brought it back, and it was because the property industry lobbied that there would be Armageddon if it was taken away in perpetuity. Now, the only evidence that there was a price spike was actually in Perth and Sydney. All the other states and cities, there was no change whatsoever at all. So it's a great what-if moment in history. If Paul Keating had stuck to it and Bob Hawke had stuck to it, maybe we might not be in the situation we're in today.
A general comment on that one is that Paul Keating would have stuck to it, but the Prime Minister was worried about electoral backlash, and that's why that. So make a note of that. Another wonderful thing that the Labor government, with the Greens, which I think would have been the Democrats back then, tried to do a wonderful thing. Because negative gearing, I'm an ex-banker, I'm a baby boomer, lots of people out here with grey hair like me, and we know what we've come through, highs and lows. I came through the 70s oil crisis, and you know what that did, and so on. There's a multiplicity of layers in all of this. We have lived in Kensington for 26 years, moved here over a year ago, joined all you beautiful people, and we're with friends. But we can all look at golden eras and say things, but Gough Whitlam was mentioned over here, did the most amazing thing for our health system, which is really bloody good. Go to America, you'll pay $100,000. No, I'm about to move. I'm waiting for the ting. But the main thing that I was getting up here about is negative gearing, because I saw it take off. I'm a banker. I'm retired now.
Right, good.
I went through 4 different layers of employment, but negative gearing went from. You watch the graphs went like this. When John Howard brought in the 50% discount and increased it to 50%, the graph goes like this. You cut off supply.
It's page 126 of the book.
Okay. Yep. And cut off supply. Okay. Because the finance brokers and all the people we were working with, mortgage brokers, all went bang. Sell people, buy 4, 5, 6, 7 houses, negative gear them, bang, and it took off.
Okay, question.
I'm finished.
Question, quickly.
The comment is, supply was killed by negative gearing in the 90s, and where we are now. We just went through it.
Thank you.
Our final 2 questioners, who are known for their concision and clarity.
Thank you, Christian.
I'd like to acknowledge that I'm standing here on Wajak Noongar Butcher was and never been ceded. I'm an Irish descendant, came over from New South Wales to Western Australia. And Tina, I'm sorry I didn't make it for your talk here. But I want to say that the foundation of any of us foreigners, you know, if you're not Aboriginal, you have foreign ownership here, okay? I was born here and I still don't feel like totally good about owning land unless you're rewilding it, respecting the elders who tell us not to fuck up the landscape with over mining for these later, you know, people who are invested in the country. So I'm sitting here squirming at all the stuff in the head that's being talked about with negative gearing and the politics of it all. You shouldn't have had to buy that land for $3 million. And the Greens, can you help Tina out by letting her know all of the councils and all of the government departments who don't know what land is theirs? Well, maybe there's that fucking conundrum because none of it is theirs.
There is a map. That's a good.
Now, our last questioner has been incredibly patient. A round of applause for patience.
One an observation and one question. With regards to having ownership of foreign ownership of housing here, a good example would be my family. I bought a home for my mum and dad, 85, 86. They used to come spend 3 months from Singapore into Adelaide and then 3 months back and then back again. And for many years we had a fantastic situation where we had contact with grandparents. My kids had contact with their grandparents. Their grandkids were part Irish, part Scottish, and part Punjabi, of course. So that was fantastic. My dad ended up with a stroke, ended up in Singapore, and then couldn't come back again. But under no circumstances would the family rent the place out, which is, I think, the situation. We have a lot of houses in Australia that are foreign owned, and the reason for that is they did not want anybody else in their home. They're prepared to forego the financial loss, but refuse to have anybody in their home. So that might give an insight to whoever is dealing with things that the finance did better, just a sense of space, okay, and that was someplace personal. So that, sadly, not according to my wishes, untenanted. So that would be worthwhile sharing that. The other point was, my kids and many others in their age group, the younger generation, are so passionate about a new Australia, and yet, with their passion and their dream of wanting to have changes occurring in Australia, they find it very difficult because our electoral system is such that trying to get into a position where you can make a difference within a political party is fraught with so much, it's so difficult for them unless they follow the party lines. They can't fully express.
I'm noting the time, and I promised I'd have everybody out here by 8:50, which is just gone. So, is your last quick question or comment? Really quickly, thank you.
They can't express their beliefs, their ideas, their passion. As a consequence, they're disillusioned, and we don't get the best people in this nation to be our leaders, and that's what we need to get us out of the mess that we have. We've got mediocre people, some great, but the reality is they're still bound by party politics and not what we all need as Australians.
Thank you. I think that was the definition of a lucky country, wasn't it? Christian, I'm turning to you for advice around the convention at this point. Do we give our panel a quick opportunity to respond each, or do we wrap up now?
Any panel member who has a burning thing that you'd like to say, you are more than welcome. If not, there's no pressure.
Just some parting words. Look, it's a very complex issue. Political parties at the moment are not taking it seriously enough, I believe, as I've mentioned before, that it is a threat to our democracy. Now, if you add challenges with Australia, the coming challenges such as AI and other things, then we've really got problems on our hands. So, we used to have politicians in this country that have big visions and big ideals. Menzies, Gough Whitlam, even Hawke and Keating. We don't have that anymore. We don't have big vision Australians, men or women, that are out there pushing these issues, and I think that's one of the problems that we have in this country. I don't know the reason why that is. I don't know the answer to that, but we don't have it. But it is an issue that needs to be pushed, particularly by the younger generation, and that's why I would encourage them to step up and start asking their members of parliament to do something about this issue.
I'm going to go to the other end of the spectrum and go back to the gentle anarchy concept. No, I wouldn't say that. I think what I would say is that I agree, leadership is lacking, but I would question whether we actually need that kind of leadership in the situation that we're in right now, because we're all capable of organising and of doing good stuff, and I think especially in Fremantle, we're bloody fucking good at it. I've seen community in action at various levels, and we can make things happen. It's not grand gestures, it's just little things, and just getting up and doing it is where it starts. It's not easy, but it works.
My closing words is just remember that Australia has a black history, and that Aboriginal people didn't have the opportunity to be given homes where we could thrive and create generational wealth. So we're still stuck in that struggle, and you really need to think about that, because this is why our mob are homeless. This is why all the issues, the intergenerational trauma. So when you do see a homeless person on the street and is of Aboriginal descent, just say, walk up to them and just offer your kindness, and that's all I ask.
Yeah, I like going to the person's point about political parties. Like I'm really proud to be a part of a party that's made up of people from walks of everyday life, and the policies are informed by people that know what they're talking about, like discussions with Sergio and community groups and so forth, and that have a fundamental focus and belief that housing is a human right. And and I'm really proud to be a part of a party that has that fundamental belief, because everything else falls in line behind it, and it acknowledges so many other things that need to be addressed in the community. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
A big thank you. That was such an extraordinary panel. Thank you for your time and your input, and thanks to each of you for your amazing questions. And with that, I'm going to head back to you, Christian, for some final words, and thanks to everyone.
A round of applause for Brad Pettitt as MC. That was a fantastic start to the night. You were all so amicable, so kind to one another, so eloquent, so thank you. I know it's cheesy, but could you please give yourself a round of applause as well? Now, if you'd like to stay behind and make friends, you're going to have a better life. If you'd like to come and speak to our speakers while you can catch them, please show initiative. If you give me your contact details, I'll put you on our subscriber list. Next month's event, as a part of my community work, I meet dozens of tourists a week, and they've started to say to me, should I go to South Fremantle or Fremantle for a day? They're picking between South Fremantle and Fremantle. Yep. So you are going to be amazed by the speakers that we have from the Cappuccino Strip. Next month, they're going to be talking about what they want to see from the Strip for 2026. Please look forward to that. Stay behind, make a friend. Have a wonderful night.